Start with Ivanka. So workforce is a topic that impacts people in various stages of their education and work life. How will the administration look at this holistically?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to break it down into multiple elements. So when you think about the broader concept of workforce development, you think about K through 12 and ensuring the kids graduating and coming out of our school system are equipped with the skills that are necessary in the modern workforce. And especially in STEM fields, for example, we see that the students are not ready and are not able and are not prepared either for higher education in a lot of cases or to enter the workforce in a meaningful way. So education is very core. The second area we're looking at is the role of vocational education, in particular apprenticeships. And we actually just had a very robust discussion with the Chancellor of Germany when she was in town just a few weeks ago, because the Germans have really led the way on this front. The Swiss have done a great job with it more recently. In England, we've seen a lot of focus on apprenticeship training. So really thinking about the role of vocational education and making sure that it is incentivized for both the students to consider it as a viable option and partnering with the private sector to really ensure that what's happening, the education taking place, whether it's at community college or at apprenticeship programs, matches ultimately their needs. So skill-based education. The last thing we're looking at is workforce retraining. So for people who have been out of the workforce for a number of years and are looking to re-enter, or people who are currently in the workforce, but they're in a field where jobs are rapidly being displaced. So how do we take large groups of people and think about how to retrain them in areas where their skills will be more relevant to the workforce of the future. So it's a big topic. There's tens of billions of dollars that are allocated across over 14 agencies on this topic. So another area similar to what we were talking about with infrastructure is really taking a look at all the programs that are out there, consolidating those programs and working collectively. We had a meeting last week where we had the Secretary of Education, Wilbur. We had the Secretary
Mick Mulvaney was there.
Mick Mulvaney was there, really thinking about how we can ensure that everyone's working collectively with these goals in mind.
Great, thank you. Secretary Ross, are there ways to incentivize the private sector to further their investment in workforce training? Many of them have taken a leadership role on this already.
Yes, the big corporations seem to be finding a pretty good way to do it. If you have a large number of employment needs in given locations, you can partner with local community college, with even some of the high schools to accomplish the purpose. What's harder is to get the small business who has very limited needs to be able to do it. So we've been focusing some on delivery mechanisms. And one of the ones I'm kind of intrigued with is integrating technology into the delivery mechanism. You have licensing problems at schools. You have all kinds of things of that sort. So I think combining the human instructor element with internet delivered service in education is a very important thing. Specifically for the small businesses, we're looking at programs whereby they can both get an assurance of retention through a kind of loan program to the students, with the idea being they would gradually forgive those loans as the student stays on with the employer, maybe over a 5-year period, and trying to match that with tax deductibility to the corporation, but hopefully not taxable income to the student as the loans are forgiven. And couple that perhaps with some loans from the Small Business Association, Small Business Administration, to the little companies, backed by the combination of the company's credit and the loans that they had made to these students on some realistic loan-to-value ratio. So we're trying to get into the nitty-gritty of the how so that this can truly be rolled out on a nationwide basis and help not just big companies but little ones, because the younger companies tend to be the ones who are really producing the jobs and are expanding the most rapidly.
Certainly get a feel for why Secretary Ross is at the table on workforce development. Dina, the private sector, to continue on that conversation, as we've mentioned so far, they've been the leaders so far in workforce development. As we look at making this a true initiative of the administration, what role will the private sector play in that?
Well, first of all, I think clearly defining some measurable goals in each of the initiatives. Having spent the last 10 years in the private sector, I'm having a little bit of whiplash coming back to government and remembering some of the inefficiencies and some of the difficulties. When Reed and Jared and Chris spoke to the president about taking on the IT challenge, you know, the minor thing of trying to modernize the IT of the U.S. government, the president nailed it by saying, "That sounds like a really hard thing to do that's going to help the next guy." And I think that's often why so many of these projects haven't been taken on. They require presidential leadership and capital and a real commitment to work with the private sector. And I think the private sector will push us in the right direction through the American Innovation Council to actually have measurable goals in each of these initiatives, as Leader McCarthy was laying out. When I was working with Kathy and Bob Steele and others in New York on the private sector initiatives we built, we really tried to think about our company as, at the time, as a lab of innovation. The private sector can take riskier capital to build new models around job creation, economic development, whatever they may be, and actually have the rigor of a measurement system to see how this program worked and what it achieved. But it really is ultimately only government that can scale programs in a meaningful way. And I do think in this administration there is an incredible desire to have a real legacy around things that the private sector helped us achieve that we can really measure in an important way.
It's been interesting as we've started to study it. The same principles that are holding true in countries that have always favored apprenticeship programs are true here. They're just being driven by the private sector. When our private sector companies team with local community colleges, help them do the curriculum, put in place internship and apprenticeship programs at the private sector while they're doing the community college education, vocational education, they're achieving terrific results. People are not dropping out. They're on a pathway to a job, and they're good, high-wage jobs. So this is something that we, as an administration, can 100% get behind and amplify, and that's really, I think, our mission.
I think, Reed, on that point, it's worth mentioning the task force that was formed with the private sector on exactly this topic. So obviously, this will be informed by incredible academics and both government agencies and people working in just across the private sector, but some of the programs that we've examined, and Ginny Romney from IBM is on our task force, and one of the incredible things she did at IBM was really work with a series of now over 40 public schools to ensure and creating an actual curriculum with those schools, the P-TECH schools. The first one was in Brooklyn, New York, actually, and to create a curriculum for these apprenticeships, for these students going through, and then IBM would hire the students on the other side. And this stemmed, and we heard it time and time again, whether it was from Andrew from Dow Chemical or Ginny from IBM, so many large organizations were looking to cultivate and really create in this next generation of graduating students the skills that they need to employ. So it's really happening already in a very robust and dynamic way in the private sector because of the need. Right now there are over 500,000 jobs that can't be filled because the students graduating don't have the skills that are relevant for those positions. So we want to bridge that gap. We want to take these programs and grow them in a very real and measurable way.
It's a great point. And one of the things we have to do as part of that is we have to rebrand vocational education. We need to make it something that is honored, as your father has said so often, that a skill needs to be honored. And fortunately, we have someone in Ivanka that knows a little bit about branding. You've also been a vocal person about the need to empower women in the workforce and in the workplace. Today is Equal Pay Day nationally. How will this workforce initiative support your goal of empowering women in the workplace?
Well, my father wants to create 25 million jobs in this country, and women need to fully participate for that to be realized and for that goal to be realized. Women are starting businesses at an enormously fast rate. We need to empower them and to fuel that growth. When we think about workforce development, and just one component of it, I was talking about earlier, STEM education, while 48% of today's workforce are women, only 24% of people in STEM fields are female. And when you think about where the jobs of the future are coming from, that's a very frightening statistic, and we're actually moving in the wrong direction. So over the course of a little over a decade, women's participation in science, engineering, math, and technology has actually slid from just around 30 to now in the low 20s, depending on which of those disciplines. So it's really important we think about the introduction of girls in STEM fields in our school system, making sure that they're really participating in these fields, because when we think about equal pay and the challenge we have to finally level the playing field, I think this will be a very important component when we think about the future to doing just that.
We talked about it in the first answer. This is going to be a holistic approach. And unfortunately and fortunately, all these topics we're talking about today are big topics. They take sustained effort in order to effectuate them properly. And you're talking about workforce. Well, that starts in K-12, right? And then it leads into a vocational apprenticeship, and then it gets into retraining, as Ivanka was saying. These are big projects, big initiatives, but that's what this administration wants to take on. Let's go to the CEOs to get their input and ideas. So I think
Phillips over here. Just to pick up on the apprenticeship idea, we've tried that at Run a Technology Company in
Charles,
New York.
sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And with CUNY, it's actually worked pretty well, but it did take a lot of time, and this is where the federal government can help. So we gave the CUNY our software. They built 2 courses around us, and when the kids graduate and get certified, we guarantee them a job with us or one of our customers. That's working well, but finding the professor who understands that, who wants to do that, understands it's okay for academia to partner with a commercial company, that took 2 or 3 years to find that person each university. And the second thing is just the funding. There has to be a computer infrastructure set up. Somebody has to train the professors. Curriculum has to be built, so it's not inexpensive, and that take another 2 or 3 years. And so the idea is great, but just need some way to scale it over time and then encourage you, because that's what happens in India and Manila. That's what they've been doing this for many years. If we could do that here, that shortage of talent that we have in technology, that's the way they address it.
And we've seen some of the most successful examples happening organically, just like you mentioned, where private sector needs at companies are being met through community colleges, where they're collaborating locally, creating a curriculum that is mutually advantageous to the students graduating and to the companies who are prospective employers. So we're studying all those different efforts and looking to figure out how to scale it. I think Secretary Ross mentioned the role of digital, which is enormously important. Also the role of creating accreditation programs and really thinking about how to create both standards and certificates across different industries. And the construction industry in particular has done quite a good job on this front, and that's why so many of today's apprentices that you see are coming up through that industry. So taking some examples and bringing that to manufacturing and bringing that to technology.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge the people in this audience to come up with a better way to label vocational. Reed mentioned about branding. I think it needs rebranding in 2 dimensions. One is with the young people themselves, because vocational has taken on a pejorative meaning that I think is unnecessary. But the other is with the parents. Parents have a revulsion to the idea that their offspring might actually work with their hands or not work after college. And I think we need to change both mindsets in order to get this program to really work for the young folks.
Ivanka, Secretary Ross, Dina, this is a big topic. We appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I would encourage everyone in this room to try and create apprenticeship programs at their companies, because you can all really move the needle.
Now you have two challenges.
Yes.
Thank you. Great job. Good to see you. Great job. It's now my great honor to introduce someone who's actually very, very familiar and has been a leader on all the issues that we've been talking about. In his 12 years in Congress and in his 4 years as the governor of Indiana, Mike Pence led the country in these issues, being modernizing of government and workforce development. He's also a man of incredible quality and honor. It is truly one of my great privileges to get to work with him. So please help me in welcoming the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mr. Mike Pence.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Reed. And how about another round of applause for that last panel? Ivanka and Dina and Wilbur. It's a great privilege to be able to welcome you to the White House. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone involved in the Partnership for New York City, Michael Corbett, Steven Schwartzman. It's an honor to have the leaders that are gathered in the room here with us today. I know the President is on his way over, and it's my great privilege this morning to share a few thoughts in the midst of this important conversation on the topics that you're covering before I introduce my friend and the 45th President of the United States. Let me say first and foremost, though, the companies represented in the Partnership for New York City are all American success stories. You have our admiration, you have our appreciation. Your businesses account for more than 7 million jobs, and you add over $1 trillion to our economy each and every year. What's more important is the people behind the numbers, and the topics that you've covered today are all about creating more jobs and more opportunities for Americans who are anxious to climb the ladder of success in the organizations that you represent and in companies all across this country. So first and foremost, on behalf of the President and the whole team that you've heard from this morning, and distinguished members of our Cabinet, thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your leadership. I think, as you will hear this morning in the dialogue that is about to commence, that America has elected a businessman as President of the United States, and he is committed to being the best friend business has ever had in the White House. We've already seen the results since literally when the election was called at I think it was about 4 in the morning that morning, wasn't it, Ivanka, that we were all together. Literally, we've seen renewed energy and dynamism in the American economy. The first 2 jobs reports, as I'm sure you are aware, thanks in no small part to the leadership represented in businesses here in the room today. The first 2 jobs reports show that under President Trump, nearly 500,000 new jobs have been created in the first 2 months of this year. Businesses and consumers haven't been this optimistic in decades. In fact, we just learned from the National Association of Manufacturers that in their historic quarterly report, 93% of manufacturers are optimistic about the future. That represented almost a 40-point increase in optimism since the last report. We think that is evidence of a vote of confidence in our new president and in his vision to get this economy moving again by putting common sense principles into practice. From the very outset of this administration, the president has been energetically working to roll back excessive regulation and red tape. Leaders in Congress, and I see Leader McCarthy, who's with us today, have been producing under what's known as the Congressional Review Act legislation to roll back onerous regulations that emerged in the waning days of the Obama administration. And in the coming days, President Trump will be signing even more bills into law, rolling back that avalanche of red tape. The president's also taken decisive executive action on expanding American energy, the Keystone Pipeline and the Dakota Pipeline. We continue to work earnestly with Congress for a new future on health care reform. And the President and I remain confident that working with the Congress, we will repeal and replace Obamacare with health care reform that will work for the American people and work for the American economy. And of course, in the offing before we reach the end of the year, the President is determined to roll his sleeves up, work with the Congress, and pass the largest tax reform in a generation. Business, as I said, from those numbers about optimism, business has clearly gotten the message. But today's conversation is all about learning from job creators represented in this room how we can continue to build on the momentum in this economy, particularly focusing on infrastructure, government modernization, and workforce. I can tell you that the subject that I came in at the end of, and I know was much a topic today with Ivanka and with Wilbur, having to do with improving the quality of our workforce, expanding opportunities for what is known as career and technical education, what we back in Indiana call vocational education, is a real passion for our new president. And we look forward to partnering with you in ways that we can continue to encourage investment and create opportunities for expanded career and vocational education. So today is all about really giving you an opportunity to share your thoughts. It's part of an ongoing conversation this administration has commenced since the very first day the president took office, listening to business leaders, listening to everyday Americans about ways that we can bring about his agenda to make America great again and to have our economy growing and expanding in a way that is consistent with the most powerful economy in the history of the world. I think the president is in the side chamber, so let me say to all of you, the opportunity you have today is to hear from a man who I have a chance to sit with every day. What you're going to see firsthand is what I see each and every day, and that is not only just a businessman made president, but you're going to see a leader, informed, focused, decisive, and absolutely committed to make America great again. It is my high honor and distinct privilege to introduce to all of you my friend, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mike.
Good morning. Good morning.
Sir, I know,
Hello, Ivanka.
I know you know a few of the people in this room.
I do. All the killers from New York. I'm looking at all those competitors, those great talents, great builders.
I have to give you a heads up that Ivanka chaired one of the sessions before this. Tough act to follow.
Oh, she's tough.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Vice President Pence listed some of the amazing accomplishments that have taken place since your election and your 75 days in office. The stock market has had almost unprecedented sustained growth. Unprecedented confidence from our manufacturing sector and other business sectors, leading to massive private sector investment and job growth. You have gotten rid of regulations that were unnecessary and were job stifling. You have strengthened our borders and strengthened our military. You've nominated a great superb Supreme Court justice, amongst many other things. How does all that feel?
And we're getting unbelievable credit for what we've done, other than the mainstream media, which just gives us no credit whatsoever. But we are getting tremendous credit. And if you look at the real estate industry, the mining industry, the farming industry, if you look at any of the major industries, you see what's going on. In fact, even today I was very happy, as I read this morning early, that our trade deficit with others has gone down very considerably in the last short period of time. It's having a big impact. And as you know, I'm meeting with the president of China on Thursday and Friday in Palm Beach, Florida. And I think we're going to have a very interesting talk. We're have a lot of respect for him. I've spoken to him numerous times. But we have to do better, because our deficit with China, as you know, $504 billion. That's a year.
That's incredible.
That's enough for a lifetime. Even Steve would say that. But that's a year. So we're going to have a great meeting. I'm sure we're going to have a fantastic meeting, and we're going to talk about a lot of things, including, of course, North Korea, a problem. And that's really a humanity problem. So we're going to be talking about that also.
You have made it a driving force of this administration to bring in the best minds we can from the private sector, to listen intently to them, and to take decisive action. How important is that, and how important is it to reform government to bridge the gap between the private and public sectors?
Well, I did. I brought you. I brought Gary Cohn. I brought a lot of very great people. My friend Steve is helping us out. We have a superstar committee of 22 people, and every time somebody calls me, I say, Steve, put them on. No, we want to keep it at this level. You know, the heads of the biggest companies, they all want to be in our committee, right, Stephen? But Steve likes to keep it very small. But they will go off and they'll disappear, and we'll put others on. But we've had some great meetings, and we've all learned a lot. One thing that did come up, and it came up yesterday, was Gary Cohn. Where's Gary? Is he here? Right there. Could you bring me that chart, please? Do you mind? Let me see that chart. So this was just something. This is sort of incredible. That's so beautiful. Yeah, no, you're not quite. This is to build a highway in the United States. Now, this was just done yesterday. I saw it for the first time. I said, you know, I'm speaking to some of my friends who are builders, really great builders. And they've gone through the process. We've all gone through it in New York. With we call it the zoning process in New York. But you start up here, and this is anywhere from a 10 to a 20-year process. You have, 17 agencies. You have hundreds and hundreds of permits. Many of them are statutory, where you can't even apply for the second permit until 6 months go by. The process, so this is to build a highway. This is a simple highway. And these are the agencies. So it's 17 agencies. How many different steps is it?
TJ?
16 different approvals.
16?
29 different statutes, 5 different executive orders that all apply to this process. This is indicative, so this is not a specific project, but this is the type of process that this is a state government would have to go through to permit a highway federally. This is just federal, not state regulations.
So it can take anywhere from 10, if you're really good, 10 years, to 20 years, and then they vote, and you lose. They don't want it. And it costs sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars just to go through the process. Thank you very much. That was a great job you did. Be careful. Don't fall. I don't want to have you fall. You'll be a big story in the paper if you go down. So I just saw that yesterday. Gary Cohn walked in and he showed it to me. And for no reason, I said, you have to do me a favor. But a lot of you're such pros, some of the best pros in the world sitting in this room. You understand it. It's a process. Now, I've always liked it because it gave people that could go through that process an advantage, like Jerry. But it gave us an advantage if you could get through the process. But getting a building approved in New York is a horrible, horrible thing. And that's nothing compared to when you get into the highways and the dams. They don't even talk about dams anymore. You know, hydropower is a great, great form of power. We don't even talk about it because to get the environmental permits are virtually impossible. It's one of the best things you can do, hydro, but we don't talk about it anymore. So we've come to a halt. We have a tremendous person that we put in charge of EPA, Scott Pruitt, who is an environmental person. He wants clean air, he wants clean water, but he doesn't think it takes you 26 years to get a permit to build a building and to have jobs, at which time those companies are usually gone out of business, et cetera. So we're really speeding up the process. We're going to try and take that process from a minimum of 10 years down to 1 year. I said, can't we make it 4 months? Can't we do it in 4 months? And there is a certain logic to that, but we'll be satisfied with a year, but it won't be any more than a year. So we have to build roads, we have to build highways. We're talking about a very major infrastructure bill of $1 trillion, perhaps even more. And when we have to do our jobs, I mean, if we say we're giving to New York City hundreds of millions of dollars to build a road someplace, it doesn't help if they can't start, because it's going to take 7.5 years to get the permits. Even to redo a road takes years to get the permits. You know, you have a road that's there, and you want to redo it, and you have to get new permits for the kind of asphalt you're using, the kind of concrete you may want to use. And if we're going to give all of this money, you know, there was a very large infrastructure bill that was approved during the Obama administration, $1 trillion. Nobody ever saw anything being built. I mean, to this day, I haven't heard of anything that's been built. They used most of that money, it went, and they used it on social programs. And we want this to be on infrastructure. I'm working with Steve Roth and with Richard Lefrak, two friends of mine that are very good builders. They're great builders. And they know how to get things done. They know how to cut red tape. Then we're going to give them the advantage of having what we have. I see Elaine is here, so we're so important, who is doing an incredible job, by the way, Secretary of Transportation. And Elaine will be working, but we're going to set up a committee headed by Steve and Richard, and we're going to cut a lot of red tape. But we don't want to say send $1 billion to New York and find out 5 years later the money was never spent, because we're going to be very strong that it has to be spent on shovels, not on other programs. And in the last case, a lot of it was spent on other programs. But we're going to say, if you don't spend the money, if you don't start, if you have a job that you can't start within 90 days, we're not going to give you the money for it, because it doesn't help. It doesn't help us. And we're going to be very strong on that. They have to be able to start within 90 days.
Mr. President, we have some of the great business leaders in the country here. If okay with you, they have a few questions, if that's
Sure.
Great.
Hello, Jerry. He didn't have to say his name. He was ready to say his name. We know. We know Jerry. Jerry Spire, everybody.
Mr. President, you're doing a great job, and we're all really grateful to you for the sacrifices you're making.
Excuse me, sir. Okay.
Hope you heard that.
That sounds much better.
I think from New York's point of view, we send a lot of money into the economy. As a number of people have said, it's over $1 trillion. We're worried that we're going to have a problem with Congress. And,
With the deductions, right? Deduction.
That too. But we're worried about various programs that help the city. The city's doing fine right now. Even the Yankees are doing fine. But what we're really concerned about is the future. Do you have any advice for us?
Well, look, I love New York. And, you know, in some ways, we're all lucky that I'm from New York, because New York has unique problems. So does Los Angeles, so does Chicago. You know, there are places that have unique problems. One of the problems that you have is debt and deductibility. That's a big one, because a lot of the states that don't have debt or have very little debt, like in the case of Mike Pence, where he did such a good job in Indiana, and it's a AAA rated bond, one of the strongest in the country. And, you know, deductibility is not that big of a deal, because they don't have that much to deduct. And over here, you know, in New York, when you look at what's going on with us, we don't know in terms of the municipality and in terms of the state, we don't know if it can even make it if you don't have that. Are people going to buy? So it's a very big problem. And the problem I have is that there are many places throughout the country that are in the exact opposite position. And they consider that a gift to the state and a gift to the people. And we know New York does things that a lot of people don't read about. You know, you look at what the money that they contribute to our economy, to our country. And people don't know about that. They don't maybe want to know about that. So you do have, I call it a tale of two cities. You have different interests. But I am watching over everybody, Jerry. You're in good hands, okay? You're in good hands, believe me. You can tell the people of New York. Even though I didn't win New York State, I should have won New York State, but I didn't.
Mr. President, Kathy Engelbert with Deloitte. I want to return to a conversation we just had with Ivanka, Dean, and Wilbur on jobs, the workforce of the future. And so as we think about that and we think about our skill sets, in New York City alone, our public high school graduation rate is at 70%. But the readiness of our students for college and careers is only assessed at 37%. So as we look at the pace of change, we look at the digital transformation we all see in business in the marketplace, and we look at the skills that this disconnect between what employers need and what our students coming into our workforces are prepared to deliver. It would be great to get your thoughts on the priorities of the administration around education, around, again, what I like to call not the future of work, but the work of the future, because the future of work sounds a little ominous, but the work of the future actually sounds pretty visionary. Right. So if you could give us those priorities and how readiness
Okay, so before you sit, so you're giving me numbers from New York. You're a proud New Yorker, but you're giving me numbers. Why is it doing so badly? Tell me. Why are the numbers so horrific in terms of education, and what happens when somebody goes through school and then they can't read after they graduate from high school and they can barely read? So what's the answer?
Yeah, so first I would say that as we look at New York, New York's made enormous progress in a decade. By the way, that 70% was 50%, so a 40% increase. So we're making enormous progress in making an impact.
See how quickly she's changing? See that, Billy?
Making enormous progress, but we're not done. We have a lot of work to do. And I think we talked earlier about public-private partnerships, apprenticeship models, which we have a beautiful apprenticeship model that works and brings them our next generation of leaders. So I do think there's a lot we can do through relooking at